Hi, Marissa. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Thank you so much. Nice to
Yeah,
meet you.
thank you. Good to meet you. I feel like I know you a little bit. We were just saying that you've been listening to the podcast. I've been watching your TED Talk, looking at your books, and would love to hear more about your background. And I know you haven't always been in coaching. I know at some point you were in the professional, or you're in the professional world now, but you were in the corporate world. Can you walk us through that journey and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things I love about your podcast. You always make sure there's time to hear a lot about people's backgrounds. So I'd love
Sure.
to just share some highlights. Um, I started out one of five girls. So in a family of girls, my father, I think, was trying to have a boy, and we tried to get a male dog, but then we could only get a female dog. So it was one of those dynamics, but I grew up in an environment where I could do anything I wanted to do. And I decided that I loved science and math, and particularly chemistry. So I studied chemical engineering, worked as an engineer for a while, really loved that, and then did my MBA, as most engineers do. And what I noticed early in my career was that how much I loved change and I loved projects. And so I found myself after my MBA being a little scared of going back to a job where I'd have to stay there for a while.
Right.
And so I decided to do management consulting. I joined Anderson Consulting at the time, which became Accenture. And that was a really good fit for me because it was consulting and project-based things. And I got a lot of variety and a lot of experience working in various industries, all with that kind of transformation energy, mostly around technology or supply chain operations and in manufacturing environments. And I did that for 14, 15 years, made my way kind of up through the ranks at Accenture to the managing director or partner level, where I was the lead for the aerospace practice in Canada, which is where I'm located. And I loved everything about it for a while. But at the time, I sort of realized that the way in which I was scaling my own leadership was sort of really taxing. I had two kids. Had a huge team in India, so I was flying to India all the time, and I got recruited away by a local firm that sort of, uh, promised me sort of better
Little
lifestyle,
work-life balance.
a little bit life-like balance.
Yeah.
I moved into this new environment, and as a very senior executive, and I just hated it. Like, it was just so terrible. I felt like I had changed environments to a degree that I just wasn't prepared for. And at the time I just decided it was all them. Like,
Right.
it was
Yeah. It was external.
it was
Mhm.
totally
Mhm.
external. I didn't really have the advantage of the reflections that I have now around the things that I should have been doing more differently. But at the time, I believed that it was just them, and I left kind of without a plan. And that was a little bit stressful, although I was like, I'm just going to do client facing work again, because I became more and more senior. So you really only deal with clients during the sales cycle and the escalations. You don't
Sure.
actually delivery work. So at the beginning, I was just going to do like strategy consulting, kind of get back to my bread and butter of working directly with clients. But then I had some executive coaches over a few different milestones, like when I was made senior manager, when I was up for partner, when I made partner. Over about a 7-year period, I had kind of 3 different mandates with 3 phenomenal coaches. And I always kind of thought they had cool jobs. And cool jobs in the sense that, they worked with really like amazing, talented people in difficult roles. And so they had a lot of variety, and they seemed to know some cool stuff, but I secretly didn't really get them, because most of them were psychology backgrounds or coaches that had been coaches for years. And coaching was still very foreign to me as like sort of this hardwired technical engineer kind of mindset, analytical mindset. So, but I was curious enough to want to just dabble in. And so I took a kind of an introductory to coaching course, and I fell in love with it. I was like, oh my goodness, like, this is the thing that everybody was trying to teach me and that I wouldn't listen to. And these are the skill sets that I needed to have just more attuning to my environments, my culture, other people, different styles. I mean, there's just like this world exploded in terms of all the things, all the tools and assets that I could have had at my disposal. And I decided that's the only thing I wanted to do. I wanted to kind of bring this idea of leadership development, to stakeholders like me, like skeptical
Yeah,
stakeholders like me that think that there's no other way to do the job than the way that they've been doing it, that think that the environment forces a certain amount of stress level and intensity and all those kinds of things. And
how
so
long ago, sorry not to interrupt, but how many years ago was
that's
that
9 years.
pivot?
That's
Okay.
9 years. Yeah. So then I've been doing that ever since. And so I serve mostly corporate, very senior corporate clients. I work with them individually. I work with their executive teams. I really love the journey of kind of unlocking potential in them, ease in them, joy in them as
Sure.
they do these really, really challenging jobs.
One thing that really struck me, so you've got a great TED Talk. It's got a lot of views, and there's just it's concise, and there's some like really that's what I love about TED Talks, right? There's just a lot of information well packed into 15 minutes or whatever it is. And you talked about, and I'm paraphrasing, so clean it up for me if you need to, but you really talked about as your level of responsibility rose, so did your stress level, and that I think really resonated with me because I've been there myself. And can you talk through that and some of the concepts behind what you learned from that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that anyone who has, and I saw your profile as well. I mean, you had all these advancing leadership positions. You kind of, one of the reasons that you get those roles is because you show a lot of accountability, a lot of ownership, a lot of responsibility. And those things are really, really positive attributes. And so you continue to scale, but then all of a sudden you have all of these accountabilities, responsibilities, and if you're gonna kind of hold all that on your shoulders, you're not the master of the universe. Like you
Right.
can't control. And so this urge, this I think that the side of sort of ownership and responsibility can turn into kind of trying to control environments, and that is not a very good lever. It's just not a
Right.
very good lever. There's no way to scale. And what I think there's just a dramatic shift that's required, and I see it in my clients, a dramatic shift that's required where you maintain that ownership and that responsibility, but you detach in a healthy way with the desire to control, and then you double down on all of the things you do to enable your people and develop your people and scale your people and empower your people. So as you elevate, they're elevating, and you are surrounded by a network of these amazing humans that drive the results that you need to drive at that
So
scale.
it sounds like it's more of a flow than a push pull kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So what were some of the things you learned from that? I mean, that because that was the basis of your TED Talk, really. What were some of the key things that you learned while you went through that?
Yeah, well, the theme of the TED Talk is all about this idea of iterating, and
Yes.
and the word interactive, which I had to kind of make up so that
Yeah.
I would remember that it was a way of being. So interactive being kind of in contrast to being reactive or being proactive, because I do feel that in the pace of change that we're all dealing with now, we kind of, if we just oscillate between reactive to the urgencies, and there's always urgencies, so a lot of many leaders are feeling like they're in reactivity far too much. They want to be proactive, they want to have strategic thinking time, they want all those kinds of things, because we feel good when we're proactive. We feel good because we're planning and we're predicting and we're methodical, and we can see, the brain really likes sort of having that goal in mind and the path towards it. Unfortunately, though, the pace of change keeps disrupting those plans. And so the utility of a 5-year plan is, it's evaporated, right?
Right.
Maybe a 3-year plan, but most people are operating on 12 to 18 months. And so that certainty that we used to be able to give the brain around, here's why we're focused here, and here are the top priorities, and here's how we carve out space, it's just all been kind of messed with. And so where a lot of us are in fight or fighting, we're in that reactive mode, and we can't really get to that feeling of being proactive like we used to. And so I had to kind of invent this new word called interactive, which is that idea of, okay, I still have an aspiration that I'm headed towards. And I call it very specifically an aspiration versus a goal, because it's not time boxed. It's directional. Like I'm headed there,
Yeah.
going to get there as fast as I can, but I can't lock it down because I might change a whole bunch of different paths to get there, or even just the timing associated with it. Or we may decide to adjust our navigation a little bit, right? So having a really clear aspiration, but really trying to optimize the iterations that you're going through and having your planning cycle be a lot shorter. And that's, the advent of agile and those kinds of other methodologies. It's kind of similar to that idea, except I found for leaders, it's just, it's the way I describe kind of that flow state where you're attuning to the challenge, and you're also flexible and you're learning from what's happening every day and from what's unfolding every day.
Right. Well, if you even look at like publicly traded, huge companies, Apple Computer, Boeing, whatever, you don't hear analysts talking about their 5-year plan really, unless they're talking about a specific product, like the Apple car might be out, but that's not a financial,
Right.
forecast, because it's too unpredictable, I think. And what I think's interesting, because everyone's always like, what's your 1, 3, 5-year plan, 10-year plan? And I'm like, I kind of shut down mentally the further out it goes, because my
Yes.
brain thinks there's a certain amount of, or too much uncertainty. So how much work am I going to put into the 5-year? And like you said, I might have my North Star out there, like, okay, we're going to $10 million in this business or whatever. But if we're at 2 million right now, what my brain really says is, can we get to 3 in the next 12 months? What does that look like? And can we back into that,
Yes, absolutely. And I think that what happens sometimes is because people don't have that North Star,
Yeah.
because they can't have a 5-year plan and they don't really have a North Star, because we weren't really programmed, like you weren't really taught to have a North Star as a,
Right.
right? Maybe in the entrepreneurial world, much so, but in the corporate world, you're like, what's
No.
my 5-year plan, right? It's
Yeah.
like, what am I delivering to? And so I think what's happened now is that people that are in corporate roles, they have to have that North Star because that's your navigation piece. And then they absolutely have to iterate through that shorter planning window and execution window and keep correlating it towards that North Star. And that's something that I think makes a really big difference. When I meet people who are nearing burnout, it's because they've just been in that reactivity for so long and they're so frustrated that they
Yeah.
can't kind of find a way to ground themselves. And I feel like that's the best way. It's like, okay, fine, you're anchoring on your North Star, but you're iterating your way towards it.
Do you find that, because I'm guessing your clientele is all running businesses in the hundreds of millions, if not into the billions of dollars, do you feel like that audience is as coachable, more coachable, less coachable? And I know I'm kind of grouping them all together. I'm sure there's individuals, but I can see sometimes having some pretty tough egos maybe to deal with at that level. How's that been for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I do think that there's a lot of programming that happens in corporate cultures, right? So there's
Mhm.
a lot of um, norms and assumptions. And so sometimes when I'm working with a new client in a new environment or cultural environment, and one advantage that I have is that because I was with Accenture in a consulting role, I worked in a lot of different corporate environments. And that was just part of like my job because I was moving from company to company. So I'm pretty quick at sort of getting some of the symptoms of the dynamic. But sometimes what you realize is that there's just a lot of rigidity around what degrees of freedom they have, or what and so I don't find that it's like overt resistance, but there's just a lot of kind of legacy and
Yeah.
social and cultural norms that kind of tie people up a little bit, and it makes it difficult for them to think that they have degrees of freedom that they don't have. And actually, just speaking for myself, I mean, that's kind of where I was at. I mean, I thought when I decided to leave Accenture, and then I decided to leave this other firm, um, I kind of felt like I couldn't work anywhere ever again because it was such an overreaction, because I had kind of been brought up a certain way and I didn't understand that there was this whole other way of being that
Right.
I wasn't privy to. So I do think that you have to understand, my experience is trying to understand that there's just been a lot of norms that are part of the brain's biases, And I find that it's like pulling at a little sweater, you find a little thread and you unravel and you get them quick wins really fast. I mean, that's the magic of coaching. Is I often work with people for 6, 8, 12 months, but I have to get them like little wins within a couple of weeks where they try something and something shifts for them, and they, I make suggestions, and we ourselves iterate to kind of to a little success, and then they start.
So you might wait for the big home run idea a little bit until you get some buy-in first.
Exactly. Yeah.
And part of that buy-in sounds like it's your ability through your experiences to read the culture, not just the person, but the culture of the company, to figure out, because it sounds like they're not as resistant, but you probably hear a lot of stuff like, oh, I hear you, but I don't think we can do that.
Exactly.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's exactly how I was. I mean, when I was
Mhm.
getting really, really good reflections from my coaching session, I kept saying like, yeah, but I don't think I can do that. Or
Yeah.
you don't know my environment. And because they'd be like, why can't you? What's stopping you? Good coaching questions. And I was like, everything's stopping me.
I'm smiling here because I had a boss one time, and he had written up his kind of list of non-negotiables in a good way. It was like a kind of a document about how he communicates. And there was one line that says, eliminate the phrase "yeah, but" from your vocabulary. Like every sentence that starts with "yeah, but,"
Absolutely.
which is where we just were, right? So, do the companies, are you usually hired by the corporation or by the individual?
Yeah, I'm usually hired by the corp. I mean, 95% of the time it's the corporation. So there's often that other dynamic too, which is, uh, is this confidential? Can I really tell you everything? I mean, there's a lot of trust building that has
Right.
to happen at the beginning, and what's your mandate, and why do I always tell them like I'm a perk,
Right.
like a total perk, but they're like skeptical that this is really.
Well, no, because they might feel like, am I being put on remedial training? Why am I
Exactly.
the one with a tutor and nobody else has them,
That
right?
used
Because
to be much more the reaction, I think, but for the most part, the mandates that I get are for high performers. So there's often like it's a sign of a commitment. They're often in a succession plan for another role.
yeah,
They just got a great role. So it usually coincides with sort of a development opportunity, but there's still that question hanging out there, like, what do people think I need to change? Or why am I not ready for this next level? Or how are you going to help me? You
right.
know?
Did your
So
clientele, like, because it does seem like it's so high level, did it start that way, or did you
no,
start just
absolutely not. No, no. It really started. In fact, it's kind of a funny story because when I first did my executive coaching certification and I was all excited about this new tool set that I wanted to serve the market with, I would, of course, reach out to my network, and my network, who had had great experiences with me doing all kinds of very important transformations in the past. They would agree to meet with me, and I'd go meet them, and then they'd be like, actually, we want to hire you. Like they just wanted to hire me. They just wanted to
right,
hire me for a job. Like they'd either
right,
ghost me or they wanted to hire me for a role that they had open. And I was like, no, 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 I want a coaching mandate. And they're like, no, 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 you want this job. And I'm like, no, no,
right.
no, I don't want this job. So it was really hard at the beginning because my network really rejected me at the beginning. Rejected, I mean, in quotation.
Right.
They just weren't ready to see, and I think that happens, they're just not ready to see you in a different light, and they're curious about whether or not you're really serious about this, or if something has happened to you, or those kinds of things. So I really experienced that, definitely the first year, the second year. So I started to serve other clients. I started to serve much smaller clients, more the mid-market. And and it was good in hindsight. It was the right thing. I got a lot of practice. I got a lot of, I was still developing my own coaching skills, right? So I mean, it was fantastic, and the mid market was really excited because they were getting also, of course, some consulting on the like sort of consulting energy from me as well in terms of things I could help them with. So that was where I really started in the early years, and then after doing it for maybe 2 or 3 years, then my network started to wake up, and now I'm principally serving the corporate.
How did it feel in the early years of going solo? From, you've got the big Accenture job, and then my impression is lesser firm, not as good of an experience, maybe not their fault, whatever.
Yeah.
And then you're out on your own, and you're probably like out of the gates, you're probably all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I'm going to kill this thing. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to bring in all my old kind of clients and people I used to work with. And that didn't happen. I've got to imagine that when you go from running businesses into the hundreds of millions and consulting with companies into the billions, and now you're sitting at home at the home office desk trying to figure
Yeah.
out if this thing's even working. I mean, was there a bit of an identity crisis in all of
Oh my
that?
goodness, of course, yes,
Yeah.
like on so many levels. Like, and I had to learn a new tactic, which I never had in my entire life, which probably could have served me well in the past, which I refer to as power crying. Like I had to learn how to power cry, because it was just really frustrating. It felt there was so much, there was a lot of rejection, as most, early businesses sort of experience, and it felt really personal because it was kind of, it
Yeah,
was,
you're the product.
it's still me. Like,
Yeah.
how come you saw me differently like then versus now? And because, in consulting, it's still a people-based business. They're still buying a person, but they were buying a person
Through an organization.
backed
Yeah.
by a brand.
Yeah.
And so it really tested, some of my my self-worth. That's sort of like, what does this all mean? And so I had to find ways to just release it, because you just realize that that's toxic. You don't want that in, your system. And
If you go back, and in addition to the power crying, if you go back into that first couple of years, what were the things, if you look back on it now, that you think led to your eventual success? Like, did you have certain disciplines? Did you always, do 10 client calls a week, or like, what did you do to keep it going when it was rocky,
yeah, I just tried. My mantra was
Yeah.
shoot me for adding value. And I used to say that, shoot me for adding value, because I did find that I had to do a lot of things that were really uncomfortable. Like I started doing YouTube videos, and I started doing a lot of writing and a lot of this, and kind of revealing things about my journey and telling little anecdotes, and all that stuff was really like, so quote unquote, like marketing, right? Like,
Yeah.
whatever, marketing. But all that stuff was really scary for me,
Yeah.
because I had never had to do anything so personal and revealing. And also I just was kind of like, isn't this just annoying? Like, does anyone even
Yeah.
want to hear all of this
Yeah.
stuff? Right. Like I just didn't have any appetite to do it. And so I had to make it about trying to add value, because that was kind of, so every post I would do, or everything that I would do, I'd be like, I'm trying to add value. And I would still get scared. I remember I would like to hit click, like post,
Yeah.
my hand would shake. Like I'd be
Yeah.
like,
Here
ah.
it goes.
And it was so silly in hindsight, but that was kind of my mantra. So when I would feel really rejected, I'd just be like, I'm just trying to add value. I would do things for free. I would do things for cheap. I was just kind of just keep putting value out in the world. And then, if people want to shoot at me for adding value. So that was the other thing. Did I break it down to, 10 calls a day and all this kind of stuff? No, but I definitely would have kind of like 3 connect emails a day.
Yeah.
And, I had but I would be like, share compassion, share energy, share happiness, share a story, share value. Like,
Well, it sounds like there was like a consistency to it the whole time. And that, again, you've always got this thing of like, I'm just trying to add value. I'm just trying to add value. And I'm guessing your back of your mind, as tough as it got, was probably like, if I continue to add value, eventually, right, this is going to build, and it's probably not going to be in the time frame that we want it to, but it eventually worked, obviously.
Yeah, and I had like, I had my little cheering committee. Like my husband was so funny, because he would never say the right thing. Like sometimes I'd be like, oh, I'm just so embarrassed. This YouTube video is so lousy. He's like, no, it's not lousy. And then I'd be like, yeah, it's really lousy. And then he's like, well, you only have 5 views anyway. And then I'm like, oh, nobody's watching my bad video.
He's like, what does it care? No one's looking at it.
Yeah. So there was just anyway, so I had him, and then I had my boys. I have 2 boys, and they were just my cheering squad. Like they just be like, Mom, you had 40 views on this video,
How old are they now?
Right now they're 19 and 16, but at the time they were,
they're like 7 and 10 years old or something at the time when you
they were
started.
just my cheerleaders. They were just really phenomenal.
So this has also allowed you to spend a great deal of their growing up years, I imagine, at least closer to home, yeah?
Absolutely,
Instead of
yes.
traveling to India and all that stuff.
Yeah. My eldest remembers like the before mom had her business and after.
Yeah.
There's like a divide in his life. My youngest doesn't remember any the before.
He only knows the good stuff. So when was there a moment where it was, was it a slow build? It sounds like it might have been, but was there a moment where you were like, okay, this is really working? Like where, you had a particular number of wins or maybe landed a large client or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, what it was just inflow. So
Yeah.
the moment when it was win was I just started. It was like I went from marketing to picking up my phone,
Right.
which was phenomenal and still is today. But it took time because what I find is it's all about the results you drive in the market, and so you need enough time for you to work with someone, and at least from a coaching perspective, you need enough time to work with someone, have them generate results and have them talk about those results, and then have someone else that they know ask them about a problem that they think you're going to help with. I mean, there's a lag. There's a significant
Sure.
lag. So it became incremental. It's like healing that's nonlinear. It became incrementally better. If you hurt yourself,
Yes.
you're getting a little bit better every day, but you're like, oh my God, like this is going to take forever. And
Yeah.
then all of a sudden there's kind of exponential. You're
Well,
starting to,
yeah, it's that sharp curve up. And I think a lot of times at that point too, it's like, oh, and then somebody watched a YouTube video that I made 3 years ago now, because now you've got content out there and you've reached out to a lot of people. And that's cool. So has Leaderly been your company name from the start? And what falls under Leaderly? Like, what are your core offerings there?
yeah. So no, at the beginning it was just my name because I didn't
Yeah,
know anything else. Uh,
sure.
when I first started, I was just kind of marisamarie.com, and I kind of just um, uh, started there. And then I guess it was about 3 years in where I was like, I want to focus on leadership development, and my offerings are really coaching, speaking, and some consulting associated with their leadership development or talent development programs, succession development programs. But the majority of work that I do is one-on-one coaching, or either executive groups or speaking and training. And
Very cool.
my writing, which I didn't talk about. So I have 3 books, and
Yeah,
my
that's what I was going to go into. You have three
yeah,
and you co-authored another,
yes,
correct?
exactly. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah. So my books were kind of another interesting journey, which was I was learning so much, and I wanted to kind of, every time I wrote a book, the 3 times I wrote a book was trying to sort of take everything I've learned and standardize it. I mean, that's kind of my engineering mindset,
Yeah.
kind of pull it together. So my first book, Work Smart, is like what was at the time, 3 years in, the 9 areas that I was working on the most. So Work Smart's an acronym for, but it was W is for well, and O is for E is for uh, sorry, O
No
is for
problem.
opportunity orientation, R is for relationship driven. So they all stand for something. And they were the activities that I was working the most with my clients. And that book was really, really helpful, not on just organizing kind of my methodology, but also in showing the world kind of what I mostly worked on, what I mostly did, the type of work, because I think as a consultant or a coach, you're trying to show the world what's going to be an experience of working with you. So that was my first book. My second book, Iterate, is the long version of my TED Talk. It talks about the interactive, and the TED Talk was a 14-minute version of my book, Iterate. And then just a month ago, or 2 months ago now, I published Blind Spots. And Blind Spots is a book about the 7 blind spots I see the most in my clients, and how they overcome them, how do they see them, and how they develop. Because I do think that when you reach a certain level of leadership, it's kind of the unlocking of the next level has everything to do with really identifying the gap between what you're intending to do and your impact. So intention, the gap between intention and impact, and that's where your blind spots live. And so this book is to help clients self-identify, get the feedback they need, and also work through some of their blind spots.
Can you talk about a couple of those, like most common ones?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So, I mean, some of them have very unexciting names, like false assumptions is the first one, and so that's a whole bucket of things. Um, but it's basically where the brain's decided something. So, one of the examples in the book is this client called David the Difference Maker, and David, he's a phenomenal senior leader, sales guy, makes the difference in the deals. Everybody will say like he's the difference maker. He's the one that closes the deal. But that assumption, so it's not that that assumption is wrong. It's kind of true. But the problem is that his brain kind of decides he's the difference maker, and he just had a lot of strain because everyone depended on him, because there wasn't a deal that could close without him, because people wouldn't step up on his team. People
Sure.
weren't trying to learn from him. So the blind spot was like, okay, so it's like, yeah, I'm the difference maker, but the false assumptions underneath that around like, what's the implication of that? Does
Sure.
that mean I need to be everywhere? And so I worked with him for about, I think it was ended up being 16 months, just retooling his instincts around how he positioned people on his teams, how he delegated, how he elevated people, and how he could get his workload to a level where it was sustainable and enjoyable for him again. Because he was, when we first started working together, you know, his leadership was like, he's phenomenal, but he seems like he's getting really pissed off.
Right.
And our
And
first
he's probably got nowhere to go because if you pull him from that team, it collapses, right? Like who fills the bucket if he's not there?
and he didn't
Um,
really want change. He just wanted less of
stress.
stress and this feeling and this, yeah. So that's a little transformation story about like you have to kind of realize. So false assumptions is one example. Another one is like outdated core beliefs. Like that's, it's kind of similar, but it'll be some kind of belief um well, one of my examples in that is, his name's Xavier the extra miler. He was just somebody that just felt like it was ingrained in him that he always had to go, not just like an extra mile, but an extra like 500 miles. Like he
Right.
just had to over deliver and over deliver and over deliver. And as a result, he was like a young guy on blood pressure medications, and you know his wife was worried about him, his leadership was worried about it, because they're like, he's such a rock star, but we think he's going to kill himself. And so
Sure.
so it was an outdated core belief. Maybe at many points in his life he needed to over deliver. He shared with me things about his childhood where it was just never enough and all that kind of stuff. And so, but it was an outdoor to core belief. It's like, look, you've got this nailed. Like everyone finds you amazing. Like, you know, you have to be able to take better care of yourself. And so,
That last one's reminding me of I had a guy, Michael, if you're listening, this is years ago, but he was a sales manager for me. He was first an individual contributor, and he crushed it like really, really good, to the point where, you know, you get nervous sometimes promoting those people because you don't want to
yeah,
lose the revenue, but at the same time you're like, hey, they, you know, he deserved it, and he was showing leadership attributes. And so he was so hell bent on proving himself, you know, in that role. And he was, like you're saying, like the numbers were already there, but then somehow they get on this you know, path where it's never enough, not for us, but for them. Or there's this fear of like, if I'm not driving 100 miles an hour, like I can't slow down to 60. Slowing down to 60 is the same as stopping almost, right? To the point where I remember we were on a conference call and he just went away. Like all of a sudden his sound was gone, and he had passed out from drinking. Like he had a newborn. He was like drinking Red Bulls all day, like, you know, and he just health just, and he was only in his probably late 30s at the time, you know. So
yeah,
it was kind of a wake up, you know, to this is a marathon, not a sprint, right? In most of these jobs.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it's hard for the organization because like they really care about the individual,
Yes.
but it ends up being in kind of this area where it's like, how do you tell somebody to really shift their beliefs around
Yeah.
around, and that's something where I think coaching can be really really powerful, especially in the way that with all my programs I do stakeholder interviews, so I interview people around them. And in that particular case, with Xavier, I interviewed his wife as well. Like I was like, you know, and sort of show them a mirror a little bit around like, this is the impact on people that really really care about you. And then it's about rebuilding the habits, rebuilding the structures, and that takes some time, but he's doing phenomenal. And he
Yeah.
he what's magical about doing this work for 9 years is I have, notes from people 3 years later that are like, I just had a baby and it's
Oh,
so
that's so cool.
great. And yeah, and like, I'm doing great. And so that's, this whole like just adding value, like that's the thing. Like that's the thing that's so special about this work.
Well, and you just mentioned it. I mean, the letter with the having a new baby and then interviewing his wife and stuff. How much does the balance of everything, right? Because I mean, there's really gardens of life, right? We've got our finances, we've got our careers, but we've got our health, we've got our kids, we've got our, maybe travel or adventure kind of bucket. And
Yeah.
like, how much does life balance play a part in coaching these high level executives?
It varies. It really
Yeah,
varies. Some of my mandates can be 100% honed in on
the
performance
objective.
objectives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but it's rare that over the period of time that we work together that there aren't other areas of their lives that they want to tweak or want to work on, or they'll bring topics that are that sort of are a little bit more far ranging. But I find for the most part, what's really been nice over I think the maturity of the coaching industry is that companies do understand, especially with their very, very senior leaders, that they have to be happy to be able to do the work and to be so, I mean, it's such a vocation in terms of the hours, the commitment that, I mean, at the very senior level, people are giving a lot of their lives to the organization. And the degree to which that they find a way to balance it is the degree to which they're going to be able to remain in the job.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a boss once tell me, because I think I was feeling overwhelmed, and I think I said I was overwhelmed, which I found out later was probably not the right word to use. But I mean, maybe it was because that's what I was feeling at the
Yeah.
time. But what I learned was, I'm only going to rise to my level of overwhelm. Right. I mean, it would almost be inhumane to give me more work if the amount of work I have now is driving me bananas. Right. So I've got to figure out a way to handle what I've got if I want more.
Right.
And I that's always just stuck with me. And also the best executives that I've ever met, all the way to CEOs of multi-billion-dollar companies, they've got an ease to them. Marissa, they
Oh,
have that.
I know.
Yeah, they're just smooth customers. They don't get rattled. They don't.
Yeah.
Maybe underneath there's some stuff going on there, but gosh, I mean, when you meet them, they always have time for everybody. They always have a smile. They're very
Yes.
cordial. They don't seem to and I know there's some movie characters that pound the desk and stuff, but in real life I just don't feel like it's like that. I feel like the
I totally
CEOs
agree
are,
with you. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And this is why it's really interesting, because if I kind of look at my trajectory of, you know, getting more and more and more intense,
yeah, yeah,
and yet I had exposure to the C-suite, and I do, early in my career, and I used to always be amazed. Like, for one example is I used to call on the CFO of a super, I don't know, tens of billion-dollar company. I don't remember how big, hundreds of billion, I don't know how big it was, but anyway, it doesn't matter, very big. And I would have a meeting with the CFO every quarter for 15 minutes. That was my slot. And I had all of Accenture sending me everything I was supposed to talk to this guy about in this 15-minute slot. Like literally like this offering and
yeah.
this offering and this capability and this
Mhm.
capability. And that 15-minute slot was a check-in on our existing delivery and also potential opportunities, right? But the bulk of what this guy wanted to talk about was like, how's the current work going? And the bulk of what my firm wanted me to do was pitch
Sell. Sure. Mhm.
next. And so I would get so like, I would just, my brain would be on like a million miles an hour trying to figure out how I was going to get as many data points out of my mouth in 15 minutes as possible. And it was always the same. His EA would come and get me, and she would guide me, gently into his room, and he would take time and he would talk to me about my husband, and he would talk to me about my kids, and he would talk to me about his vacation in Italy for like 10 minutes.
And you're probably like, dude,
My
I got like
brain,
5 minutes left.
my brain would be like, oh my God. Oh, and then he would say, so what do you want to talk about? And I would do my best to say whatever, few sentences I could. And he would just so precisely and quickly say, okay, you have to go talk to that person for that and this for that. And he would just position like the next quarter just beautifully incredibly. And so I had exposure to that. Like, even though I was like I was not at that level, I had exposure to that. And so what's been really fun is, over the last 9 years, is figuring out how to help people with that shift, because
Yes.
that is the only way that you get to that level. Is
Yeah.
and a lot of it has to do with all the mindfulness stuff around present moment, around, there is, you have to be able to, they develop, the very senior leaders develop an incredible ability to be extremely present, to shut down all the chatter, because they've got a gazillion things going on in their mind, to be very focused and to be extremely connected to the individuals that they're speaking with in the moment. And because they do that, they're extremely effective. And then that pyramid underneath them goes and does really good, clear work. And if they're not, if they allow themselves to get jittery, they create all kinds of chaos. One of the examples I sort of envision sometimes, I went to this speedboat racing thing at one point, and I was standing on the side thinking, okay, I got a really good place. And the speedboats were racing. They were all coming by, and it was really fun to watch them come, until as soon as they passed, all the wakes of them crashing into each other and crashing into all of us was like, I was in the worst place imaginable.
Right, right.
It's like this is, and that's what I feel like sometimes leadership teams can be like, it's like everyone's in their individual speedboat, and all of this can create so much turbulence to the organization. So unless you have really clear senior leaders that are kind of guiding, you don't get the effectiveness of the organization that you really need to deliver on the outcomes you're trying to achieve.
Such a good point. And I think their calmness and effectiveness, I mean, it just carries down, right? It's sort of like, oh, this is how we conduct ourselves, right? We don't yell and scream. We don't freak out. It's all going to get done, or it won't, like whatever,
I know, it's strange, eh? It's strange how that gets you more. That the desire to win. There's a Chinese proverb that says something like, your desire to win drains you of energy.
Yeah.
There is a little bit. There's another blind spot is in the book, is called unhealthy detachment, and there's the inverse of that is unhealthy attachment. So sometimes we're unhealthily attached to our outcome, to the point where we erode our ability to deliver the results.
Totally. And I think I see it in myself. I see it in my younger self, comparing where I am now to where I am then, and everything was trying to force stuff, and a lot of times getting it done, right? Like, we're going to hit that sales number, we're going to do this and that, and generally in a positive way with my staff, but sometimes not. I mean, sometimes like, come on, we got to do it. And then there just becomes this level where that is not going to work anymore, right? You're not gonna take $100 million business unit leaders and run them around like entry-level sales reps anymore, right? And so yeah, it's really cool to see, and it must be a cool chair to be in, to be able to see the contrast in companies, the contrast in culture, contrast in leaderships, and yet still be able to see the common threads like you have and that you've written about in your books that tie so many of them together, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. The hard part about it is that so many of these tasks, activities, behaviors, they work. They
To a
work
point.
hard. They
Yeah.
work. So there's that bias and there's that programming where it's like, this is how we do it. And then they work until they don't work anymore, and they don't work at all, right? And then it's like, okay, wait, now we totally have to retool. And that's why I do adore the work that I do, because I just think that your journey to your best leader is your journey to your best life. Like, there's always this unfolding. And I think every stage of life has this beautiful arc of like, what are you supposed to be learning and how are you supposed to be growing? And accompanying people on that journey is fascinating. And I learned so much from all of my clients.
I think the thing you just said there too, that was key to me, is like, it does emulate life a lot. Like, your ability to evolve as a leader, to be that sort of cooler customer, to maybe take a breath instead of just reacting, to consider more possibilities than just the outcome that you already have preconceived in your head due to your own limiting beliefs or worldview or any of that. It makes you a better dad, right? Makes you a better mom, makes you a better friend. I think, that's why I love the leadership journey so much. And I'm glad you do too. And how can we find you? How can our listeners find you and reach out and hear more about your books and coaching and all that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is leaderly.com, but it's Ley. So it's leaderley.com. And my books are Work Smart, Iterate, and Blind Spots, and they're all on Amazon.
Awesome. I love your logo, by the way. I see it over your shoulder there. Yeah, really cool.
Yeah,
Um,
underneath it says leading self, leading others, and leading change. And that's another piece of it that's so interesting as we, it's like it sounds initially like you're like first you lead yourself, then you lead others, then you lead change, but it's not. It's like an
it's a
iterative loop.
loop.
It's a loop because you can all
Yeah.
of a sudden come back and it's like that's what's how do I lead myself now and how do I lead others now? And so it sort of feels like an infinite journey, but a really fulfilling and evolving one.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that journey with us. I appreciate having you on, and let's stay in touch. I've really enjoyed meeting you.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. It's been a pleasure.
All right, you got it.